I trusted my boss, and he used me as a scapegoat. When the company was on the brink of bankruptcy, he blamed everything on me and fired me to cover up his schemes. But he didn't know I had kept copies of all his shady dealings. I remember the exact moment everything changed. The autumn sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Morton & Reed's Chicago headquarters, casting long shadows across my desk. For 6 years, I'd watched those shadows stretch and shrink, marking countless late nights and early mornings. This company wasn't just my workplace, it was my second home. Mark Henderson, our CEO, had always treated me like family. "Alex, you're my right hand," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder with that trademark smile of his. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I believed him. God, I believed every word. I was his director of operations, but in reality, I was his fixer, his confidant, the one who made the impossible happen. When clients needed miracles, I delivered. When deadlines seemed insurmountable, I found a way. Every victory was our success, every milestone our achievement. At least, that's what I thought. The first cracks appeared so subtly I almost missed them. Sarah from accounting would fall silent when I entered the break room. Junior executives would exchange glances during my presentations. Mark started closing his office door more often, hushed voices leaking through the expensive oak panels. Then came the whispers about financial irregularities. Nothing concrete, just rumors at first. Missing funds. Questionable transactions. Auditors making surprise visits. I tried to ask Mark about it, but he'd wave it off with that disarming smile. "Just routine checks, Alex. Nothing to worry about." But I worried. I started digging deeper into our books, staying later than usual. That's when I noticed the patterns. Small discrepancies at first, carefully hidden beneath layers of legitimate transactions. Then bigger ones. Money flowing through shell companies, vanishing into offshore accounts, reappearing under different labels. I was gathering my findings, preparing to confront Mark, when security knocked on my door that Wednesday morning. "Mr. Henderson would like to see you immediately." The walk to his office felt like a march to the gallows. Every step echoed against the marble floors, each echo a heartbeat of dread. His secretary wouldn't meet my eyes as she buzzed me in. Mark wasn't alone. 2 men in expensive suits sat in the leather chairs facing his desk. Board members. Their faces were granite. "Alex." Mark's voice was heavy with practiced regret. "Please, sit down." I remained standing. "What's going on?" "Financial audits have uncovered some serious discrepancies." He slid a folder across his desk. "All trails lead to your department. Your computer. Your authorization codes." The world tilted sideways. "That's impossible." I didn't. "We have documentation." One of the board members spoke, his voice clinical. "Transfers. Altered records. All bearing your digital signature." I looked at Mark, waiting for him to defend me, to remember 6 years of loyalty. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mark, you know this isn't true." He sighed, a perfect performance of disappointment. "Alex, I trusted you. We all did. But the evidence." He gestured helplessly. "To protect the company, we have no choice but to terminate your employment. Effective immediately." Security was already waiting outside. They watched as I packed my personal items, as if I might steal something. Colleagues stared through glass walls, whispering behind their hands. 15 minutes later, I stood on the sidewalk, a cardboard box in my arms, my career in ashes. I should have walked away. Should have licked my wounds and started fresh somewhere else. But Mark had taught me too well. In business, he'd say, information is power. Always keep receipts. And oh, I had receipts. For months, I'd been quietly documenting everything. Every suspicious transfer. Every shell company. Every fake invoice. I had emails, bank statements, recorded conversations. Mark thought he was framing the perfect scapegoat, but he'd chosen someone who'd learned to play his game. I spent 2 weeks organizing the evidence, building an airtight case. The real art wasn't in collecting the information, it was in how I released it. A strategic leak here, an anonymous tip there. Like dropping pebbles into a pond, watching the ripples spread and intersect. First, I sent key documents to the IRS and SEC. Then, carefully selected pieces to investigative journalists who'd been sniffing around corporate fraud stories. Finally, a comprehensive package to the board members, the ones who weren't in Mark's pocket. The explosion wasn't immediate. It built slowly, like a symphony reaching its crescendo. First came the internal audits. Then the federal investigation. Shareholders started asking uncomfortable questions. Clients began pulling their accounts. Mark's carefully constructed house of cards started swaying. He held emergency press conferences, promising complete transparency. "We're conducting a thorough internal investigation," he assured everyone, that familiar smile now strained at the edges. I watched it all from my new office across town, where I'd accepted a position with their biggest competitor. It was almost poetic. Morton and Reed's clients were fleeing straight into our arms, bringing their business and their trust issues with them. The end came on a Tuesday morning. I was in a meeting when the news broke, FBI agents walking into Morton and Reed's headquarters. Mark Henderson being led out in handcuffs, his jacket draped over his bowed head. That evening, I sat in my favorite bar, watching the news coverage. Mark's face filled the screen as reporters shouted questions. For a moment, our eyes met through the television, and I saw the recognition dawn. In that instant, he knew. He knew who had orchestrated his downfall, who had learned his lessons too well. The company's stock plummeted. Clients fled en masse. The empire Mark had built through decades of manipulation crumbled in weeks. He faced federal charges, civil lawsuits, and the complete destruction of his reputation. Some say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I've learned it's best served methodically, precisely, with the same attention to detail that Mark had used to betray me. He'd taught me everything he knew about corporate warfare, never imagining I'd use those lessons against him. Now, sitting in my corner office at the competition, I sometimes think about Mark. About loyalty, betrayal, and justice. Was it worth it? The sleepless nights, the careful planning, the cold calculation of it all. I look at the news articles framed on my wall, the story of Morton and Reed's collapse, Mark's conviction, the industry-wide reforms that followed, and I smile. Some lessons need to be taught the hard way. But late at night, when the office is empty and the city lights twinkle below, I wonder. I learned one final lesson from Mark Henderson: the price of revenge might be your own humanity. Because now, every time someone says, "I trust you," I hear his voice. And I understand why he smiled so much while plotting betrayal. They say success is the best revenge. But success alone wasn't enough. I needed him to know it was me. Needed him to understand that his perfect plan, his careful manipulation, had created the instrument of his own destruction. Last week, I received a letter from the federal penitentiary where Mark is serving his sentence. Just 3 words on expensive stationery: "Well played, Alex." I keep it on my desk as a reminder. Not of victory, but of cost. Because in the end, I became what I hated: a master of manipulation, a player of games, a betrayer of trust. The student who surpassed the teacher. And sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, I wonder who I really am now. The loyal employee who was betrayed? Or the calculating strategist who orchestrated a perfect revenge? Maybe I'm both. Maybe that's the real price of revenge, not just destroying your enemy, but transforming yourself in the process. The company's doing well now. Our stock is up, clients are happy, and my position is secure. By all measures, I've won. But winning feels different than I imagined. More hollow. More complicated. Mark Henderson taught me his final lesson from behind bars: revenge changes you. Makes you harder. Colder. More like the person who wronged you in the first place. I've started closing my office door more often these days. Speaking in hushed tones. Keeping receipts. After all, you never know who might be taking notes. I've started mentoring a young associate recently. Bright, eager, dedicated, just like I was. Sometimes I catch her staying late, documenting everything, watching me with those sharp eyes. And I wonder, is she learning too well? Am I creating another version of myself? Yesterday, she pointed out a discrepancy in our quarterly reports. Nothing major, just a small inconsistency that most would miss. But she found it. Just like I used to find things for Mark. I praised her diligence, of course. Encouraged her attention to detail. But later, alone in my office, I pulled up her personnel file. Started documenting her activities. Just in case. Because that's what revenge really does to you, it makes you paranoid. Makes you see potential threats in every shadow, betrayal in every careful question. Makes you wonder if karma works in cycles, if there's always another player learning the game, waiting for their turn. Mark's words echo in my head: in business, there are no friends, only temporary allies. I used to hate him for that cynicism. Now I understand it wasn't cynicism at all. It was experience. The business papers call me a success story. Rising from scandal to success, they say. A phoenix from the corporate ashes. They don't know about the nights I lie awake, reviewing security footage, checking access logs, monitoring email patterns. They don't see how I've fortified my position, built fail-safes, created my own network of informants. Because that's the final truth about revenge: it doesn't end with one victory. It becomes a way of life. A lens through which you view every relationship, every interaction, every quiet conversation behind closed doors. I keep Mark's letter in my desk drawer now, next to a growing file of documents about my new protégé. Just in case. Always just in case. After all, that's what Mark would do. And in the end, maybe that's his real revenge, making me become him. But I'm smarter than he was. More careful. More prepared. At least, that's what I tell myself at night, as I review the day's surveillance footage, document potential threats, and plan for every contingency. Because in this game, you're either the betrayer or the betrayed. And I've already chosen my role. The student became the master. But mastery, I'm learning, is a lonely throne. I saw Mark's wife at a charity gala last month. Caroline Henderson, now Caroline Mitchell again, having divorced him shortly after the arrest. She was across the room, elegant as ever in black silk, champagne glass in hand. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something there: recognition, perhaps understanding. She'd known, of course. Must have seen the signs long before anyone else. Later, by the bar, she approached me. "He always said you were the smart one," she murmured, not looking at me directly. "Guess he was right about something." Then she walked away, leaving me with the faint scent of her perfume and the weight of unspoken words. That night haunted me more than I expected. Not because of Caroline, but because of what she represented: the collateral damage of my revenge. The secretaries who lost their jobs when Morton and Reed collapsed. The junior associates who had their careers tainted by association. The cleaning staff, the IT workers, the cafeteria employees, all caught in the crossfire of my calculated destruction. Mark had a daughter too, I remembered. Ashley. She'd be in college now, carrying the weight of her father's shame. I'd seen her picture in the society pages once, head down, hurrying past photographers outside the courthouse. Another innocent casualty. The next morning, I found myself researching education trust funds. Anonymous donations. Ways to help without leaving fingerprints. It wasn't guilt exactly, more like acknowledging the ripples of my actions, trying to balance the scales in some small way. My protégée, Jennifer, caught me looking at college scholarship programs. Planning for the future, she asked, that sharp curiosity in her eyes. I closed the browser quickly, made some vague comment about corporate social responsibility initiatives. But later, reviewing our interaction on the security footage, I noticed how she positioned herself to see my screen, how she'd casually dropped by it precisely that moment. Was it innocent curiosity? Or something more calculated? That's what this game does to you, makes you question everything. Every smile becomes a potential mask, every question a probe for weakness, every coincidence a carefully orchestrated move. I've started testing her, like Mark used to test me. Small traps, deliberate inconsistencies in reports, fake confidential documents left tantalizingly visible. Watching how she reacts, what she does with the information. She's good. Very good. Better than I was at her age. Sometimes I catch her watching me the way I used to watch Mark, studying, learning, measuring. And I wonder, when her moment comes, will she be more merciful than I was? Or will she have learned too well from my example? I've taken precautions, of course. Multiple backup servers storing everything. Deadman switches on key information. A network of loyal employees who owe their positions to me. Insurance policies, both literal and metaphorical. But Mark had precautions too. Look how well those worked out for him. Last night, I found a small inconsistency in our Asia-Pacific trading reports. Nothing major, just the kind of detail I used to plant for Mark, the first pebble in an avalanche. Jennifer had reviewed those reports last week. I stayed late, digging deeper, looking for patterns. The security cameras showed her watching me from her office, pretending to work on other projects. Our eyes met through the glass walls, and for a moment, I saw myself 6 years ago, plotting, waiting, learning. Is this karma? Or just the natural order of things? The student becomes the master, only to be outdone by the next generation of students. Mark would appreciate the irony, I think. Maybe that's why he only wrote those 3 words. He knew what was coming. Knew that true revenge isn't about destruction, it's about transformation. About creating a perfect copy of yourself in your enemy, watching them become what they hated. I should fire Jennifer. Remove the threat before it materializes. That's what Mark would do. Instead, I called her into my office this morning. Praised her attention to detail on the Asia-Pacific reports. Gave her more responsibility, more access, more opportunities to learn. Because maybe that's the real revenge against Mark's legacy, breaking the cycle. Teaching without betraying. Mentoring without manipulating. Showing that there's another way to play the game. Or maybe I'm just setting myself up for my own downfall, creating my own perfect nemesis. Time will tell. The irony isn't lost on me that I've started carrying 2 phones now, just like Mark used to. One for business, one for contingencies. The second phone contains encrypted files, recorded conversations, detailed logs of every meeting, every decision, every potential vulnerability in our company's operations. Not for blackmail, I tell myself. For protection. But isn't that what Mark would have said? Last week, during a board meeting, I watched Jennifer take notes on her tablet. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced precision, and I found myself wondering what she was really documenting. The official minutes? Or something else? Something more detailed, more damaging. I made a show of trusting her with sensitive information about an upcoming merger. Watched how she handled it, who she talked to, what she did after hours. The security cameras caught her staying late, digging through related files, connecting dots I deliberately left scattered. She's building her own insurance policy, just like I did. And part of me is proud. Because here's what Mark never understood, True power isn't in keeping secrets, it's in knowing when to reveal them. He hoarded his knowledge like a dragon with gold, using it only for leverage and control. But information, like currency, only has value when it circulates. So I've started leaving breadcrumbs for Jennifer. Small insights into how the game really works. Lessons about power, influence, and the delicate dance of corporate politics. Not to manipulate her, but to prepare her. Because maybe that's the real way to break the cycle, not by preventing the next betrayal, but by changing its nature. Teaching the next generation to use their knowledge for protection rather than destruction. To build rather than destroy. Or maybe I'm just rationalizing. Maybe I'm still playing Mark's game, just with different pieces. Yesterday, I received another letter from the prison. Longer this time. Mark wrote about regret, about lessons learned too late, about the weight of consequences. Beautiful words, artfully crafted. Classic Mark, always knowing exactly what his audience wants to hear. I had Jennifer analyze it, watching her response. She read between the lines exactly as I would have, spotting the subtle manipulations, the careful omissions, the hidden messages. He's laying groundwork, she said, looking up at me with those sharp eyes. But for what? Indeed. Mark has 3 years left on his sentence. Not long enough for people to forget, but long enough for positions to shift, alliances to change, new players to emerge. I've already started preparing. Documenting everything. Building networks. Strengthening defenses. But this time, it's different. This time, I'm not just protecting myself, I'm protecting everything I've built. The company. The employees. The legacy I'm trying to create. And Jennifer. She's either my greatest vulnerability or my strongest asset. Perhaps both. The sun is setting now, casting those familiar shadows across my office. The same patterns I used to watch from my old desk at Morton and Reed, but from a different angle now. Everything looks different from the other side of power. I can see Jennifer in her office, still working. Still watching. Still learning. Tomorrow, I'll give her another piece of the puzzle. Another lesson in the art of corporate survival. Not because I trust her, but because I understand her. She's me, 6 years ago. Hungry. Ambitious. Dangerous. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's how it should be. Because in the end, Mark's greatest mistake wasn't in betraying me. It was in thinking he could control the consequences. That's the thing about teaching someone everything you know, they might just learn to do it better than you did. The security camera feeds glow on my second phone, showing Jennifer finally packing up for the night. As she leaves, she glances up at the camera, a slight smile playing at her lips. She knows I'm watching. Knows I know she knows. And somehow, that feels like progress. I dream about Mark sometimes. Not nightmares exactly, but unsettling visions where we're back in his office, sunlight streaming through those expensive windows. In these dreams, he's teaching me again, that familiar smile on his face. But now I understand what's behind the smile, not warmth, but calculation. Not mentorship, but manipulation. You've learned well, Dream Mark says, and I wake up in a cold sweat, wondering if that was his plan all along. To create someone exactly like him. To ensure his legacy through destruction rather than success. This morning, I found a newspaper article about Mark's early release for good behavior. 3 years reduced to 18 months. The system he corrupted still working in his favor, even from behind bars. Jennifer noticed my distraction during our morning meeting. She stayed behind after the others left, perched on the edge of my desk like I used to do in Mark's office. I've been doing some research, she said carefully. About Morton and Reed. About what really happened. I kept my face neutral, waiting. The official story doesn't add up, she continued. Too many convenient coincidences. Too many perfect dominoes falling at just the right time. Our eyes met, and I saw something there that made me pause. Not threat or calculation, but understanding. Empathy, even. It must have taken incredible strength, she said softly. To survive that. To turn it around. For a moment, I considered telling her everything. About the long nights gathering evidence. About the careful orchestration of Mark's downfall. About the cost of revenge and the weight of becoming what you hate. Instead, I asked, what would you have done? She thought for a moment, those sharp eyes focused on the city skyline beyond my window. I would have done it differently, she said finally. Not better or worse. Just differently. How so? I would have saved more people. The innocent ones. Created escape routes for the collateral damage. She turned back to me. That's what you're doing now, isn't it? With the scholarship funds? The anonymous donations? I shouldn't have been surprised that she'd figured it out. After all, I hired her because she reminds me of myself. We all leave legacies, I said carefully. The question is what kind? She nodded, understanding the real conversation beneath our words. Some legacies are worth breaking, she replied. When she left my office, I didn't check the security footage. Didn't review her computer activity. Didn't add to her file in my drawer. Because maybe that's the real victory over Mark's legacy, not in perfecting his methods, but in choosing not to use them. In recognizing the potential for a different kind of power dynamic, one built on genuine mentorship rather than manipulation. The sun is setting again, painting the city in shades of gold and shadow. In my desk drawer, Mark's letters sit next to Jennifer's file, both gathering dust. Both becoming less important with each passing day. Tomorrow, Mark's second letter will be published in the business section of the Tribune, his carefully crafted narrative of redemption and remorse. Tomorrow, investors and analysts will debate whether he deserves a second chance. Tomorrow, the game will shift again. But tonight, I watched Jennifer working in her office, her face illuminated by her computer screen. She's not my enemy or my insurance policy. She's something else entirely, a chance to write a different story. To show that power doesn't have to corrupt, that knowledge doesn't have to wound, that strength doesn't have to destroy. The security cameras still run. The encrypted files still exist. The networks and failsafes remain in place. Old habits die hard, after all. But maybe, just maybe, they can evolve into something else. Something better. Mark taught me how to survive in this world. But survival isn't enough anymore. It's time to learn how to live in it. And perhaps that's the greatest revenge of all, not in destroying your enemy, but in becoming something they never could be. Something beyond their understanding or control. The night deepens outside my window, the city lights twinkling like stars. Somewhere in a prison cell, Mark plans his return. Somewhere in her office, Jennifer charts her own course. And here, in between, I write a new chapter. Not a story of revenge, but of transformation. Not of destruction, but of growth. After all, isn't that what Mark really taught me? That every ending is just another beginning in disguise. The question is, what kind of beginning will you choose?